The first thing I noticed was the sound. Not the string quartet, not the 200 guests finding their seats in the Buckhead ballroom, not even my own heartbeat, which I'd been tracking all morning like a second clock. It was the click of stiletto heels on marble, a specific rhythm slower than it needed to be designed to be heard. I was still in the bridal suite upstairs when Vivian, my wedding planner, stepped through the door. She didn't say Rochelle's name. She didn't have to. She simply looked at me, then said 4 words in the quietest voice I'd ever heard her use. What she said sent Rochelle out of that ballroom before the ceremony even began. And the thing is, I already knew she was coming. I'd been waiting. Before we go any further, what time is it where you are right now? Drop your time and your country in the comments. I want to know who's here with me for this one. I met Derek Calloway at a fundraiser for the Atlanta Children's Shelter on a Thursday evening in October 3.5 years before the wedding. I wasn't supposed to be there. My colleague Priya had food poisoning and asked me to represent our firm at the last minute. I showed up in the same blazer I'd worn to court that afternoon, a little tired, carrying a glass of sparkling water I kept forgetting to drink. Derek was standing near the silent auction table, not bidding on anything, just reading the item descriptions, with the focused expression of someone who actually found them interesting. We talked for 2 hours. I missed the dinner portion entirely. He was a structural engineer, careful with words, the kind of man who thought before he spoke and meant what he said when he did. He called me 3 days later, not 2, not 1, 3, like he'd actually considered the right amount of time. Our first date was coffee that turned into dinner that turned into a walk along the belt line that neither of us planned. By the time he dropped me off, I knew I was in some version of trouble. I was a corporate attorney at a mid-size firm in Midtown. I'd spent my 20s building something deliberate career reputation, a 1-bedroom condo in Inman Park that I'd renovated slowly, 1 room at a time, the way I did most things. I wasn't looking for Derek, but I recognized him when he showed up. His family was Atlanta old guard, not flashy, the kind of wealth that didn't announce itself, that showed up in the quality of leather on a chair, in the way his mother set a table, in the fact that they owned the building his grandfather's barbershop used to occupy, and nobody outside the family knew it. His mother, Gloria, was gracious in the way Southern women of a certain generation are gracious completely, and with a precision that left no room for misunderstanding. She was warm to me, genuinely, I think. At least in the beginning. Rochelle was a different introduction. Derek's younger sister was 28 when I met her, living in a midtown apartment that Derek quietly helped subsidize, working in event planning, which she was talented at. I'll give her that. She walked into the first family dinner I attended like she was the one who'd invited everyone. She hugged Derek for exactly 4 seconds longer than felt natural. She looked at me with a smile that her eyes didn't finish. "So, you're Eliana," she said. Not a question. The way someone says a name they've been practicing. I smiled back. I was raised in Decatur by a mother who taught 8th grade English and a father who ran his own HVAC company. I knew how to read a room. I knew how to read a person. I filed Rochelle away in a quiet folder in the back of my mind and said, "And you must be Rochelle. Derek talks about you all the time." She didn't like that. I'm not sure why. But I noticed. The first year was good. Derek was consistent in the way I needed him to be. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered things I mentioned once. He came to my firm's Christmas party and charmed my managing partner without trying, which in Atlanta legal circles is no small thing. We argued occasionally about money mostly and about how much he enabled Rochelle's financial dependence on him, but we argued like adults, came out the other side, and moved forward. Rochelle was a low hum in the background, present enough to notice, not loud enough to confront. She'd called Derek 3-4 times in a day when she knew we were together. She'd reference inside jokes at family dinners and then explain them to me with that patient smile like, I was a guest in a house I was slowly being asked to leave. She never said anything I could directly point to. That was the craft of it. She was too smart for direct. But there were moments. A Sunday brunch at Gloria's house, maybe 8 months in. Rochelle had been talking about a vacation she and Derek used to take every summer as kids, a cabin outside Blue Ridge, just the two of them and their parents. She looked at Derek when she finished and said, "We should do it again this year. Just us. Before everything changes." She didn't look at me. That was the part I remembered. Derek proposed 14 months later on the rooftop of the Inman Park restaurant where we'd had our third date. He'd called my mother first. He'd had my grandmother's ring reset by a jeweler in Buckhead, not his family's jeweler, mine, because I'd mentioned her once 6 months earlier in a conversation about something else entirely. That's who Derek was. He listened to the things people said when they thought they were just talking. I said yes before he finished the sentence. Rochelle sent a congratulations text 12 hours after the announcement. Not a call, a text, one line. "Congrats to you both. Big changes ahead." I saved that message. I don't know why. Maybe I already knew I'd need it later. The engagement lasted 14 months. And in those 14 months, Rochelle became something she hadn't quite been before. Not louder exactly, more deliberate. Like a woman who had decided something and was working backward from the ending she'd chosen. I noticed. I kept noticing. And I kept filing it away. The first crack wasn't loud. That's the thing about structural damage. Derek would tell you this himself. The failure point is never the moment the wall comes down. It's the hairline fracture 3 months earlier that everyone walked past without stopping. Mine was a seating chart. 6 months before the wedding, I was working with Vivian to finalize the reception layout. Vivian Cole had been recommended to me by 2 separate colleagues, both of whom described her the same way. Precise, unflappable, and loyal to her client in the way that mattered most. She remembered whose wedding it actually was. She ran her business out of a quiet office in Virginia Highland with exposed brick walls and a single orchid on the desk that was always alive. I liked her immediately. We were cross-referencing the RSVP list against table assignments on a Tuesday evening when Vivian paused, ran her finger down the printed sheet, and said, "I'm showing a response card that was returned unopened. The Whitfield family, 6 guests, table 4. Did you make alternate arrangements?" I hadn't. I didn't know what she was talking about. The Whitfields were Derek's mother's oldest friends. 3 generations of Atlanta history between those 2 families. Gloria had personally requested they be seated near the family table. Their absence at a Callaway wedding would be noticed, commented on, analyzed, remembered. I pulled up my email. No cancellation, no message. Derek hadn't mentioned it. I called Gloria that evening gently. She paused for a moment too long before she said she was sure it was just a mail issue. Her voice had that careful quality it got, sometimes the one that meant she was selecting her words from a larger set she decided not to share. I didn't push. I thanked her and hung up. 2 days later, I was at Derek's apartment when his phone lit up on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. I wasn't reading his messages. I wasn't the kind of woman who did that, and I had never needed to be. But the screen was face up, and the name was face up, and the preview was face up. It was Rochelle. "Did you talk to the Whitfields yet? Because if Gloria finds out before you do, it's going to be worse." I stood in Derek's kitchen for 11 seconds. I counted them without meaning to. I put the phone back exactly where it was. I finished my glass of water. When Derek came out of the shower, I was sitting on the couch with my laptop open, reviewing a merger contract for a client. We had dinner. I laughed at the right moments. I drove home at 10:15 and sat in my parking garage for 6 minutes before going upstairs. I did not confront him that night. Not because I was afraid. Because I needed to know the shape of the thing before I named it. Over the next 3 weeks, I began to pay a different kind of attention. Not paranoid precise, the way I was in a deposition, watching for the details that didn't line up with the story being told. Small things accumulated. Rochelle had offered early in the engagement to handle the wedding favors she was in event planning. It made sense, and I had enough to manage. I'd said yes. By month 4, I realized I'd never actually seen a sample of vendor invoice or a confirmation. Every time I asked, there was a reason it wasn't ready yet. Not an excuse, a reason well-constructed, plausible. Just always a reason. I found out through Vivian, who made a quiet inquiry, that the vendor Rochelle claimed to be working with had no record of a Callaway wedding booking. I didn't say anything. I noted it. There was a conversation at Gloria's house, a Saturday lunch family only, where Rochelle mentioned offhand that she'd reached out to the photographer I'd booked to check in on the shot list. I had not asked her to do this. The photographer, a woman named Janelle, who came with a portfolio that had made me cry in the best way, called me 2 days later, confused to clarify which requests were actually coming from the bride. I apologized to Janelle. I rebooked our alignment call directly. I said nothing to Rochelle, but I called Vivian that evening. "Tell me everything she's touched," I said. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then, "How much time do you have?" We were on the phone for an hour and 40 minutes. By the end, I had a list. Not a list of disasters. Rochelle was too careful for disasters. A list of deflections, delays, small redirections that individually looked like someone trying to help. Together, they looked like something else. Like someone trying to make the wedding smaller, quieter, less than what I'd planned. Or, and this thought arrived last the way the truest thoughts sometimes do, like someone buying time for something I hadn't figured out yet. That night, I looked at the text on Rochelle's phone again in my memory. "Did you talk to the Whitfields yet?" Not "did you hear from?" Not "do you know if?" "Did you talk to them?" Present tense, active. As though she knew there was something to be said, and she was managing the timeline of when it got said. I went to my home office. I opened the folder where I kept wedding documents. I made a new subfolder. I titled it, "Things I'm Not Ready to Name Yet." By the end of the engagement, that folder had 11 items in it. The bridal suite at the Biltmore Atlanta was on the 4th floor facing Peachtree Street. I'd booked it 3 months in advance, not for the view, though the view was good, but for the layout. Large enough for my mother, my 2 bridesmaids, and my best friend Camille to move around without crowding each other. A separate dressing area with good natural light. A sitting room where we could have breakfast brought up without eating off our laps. I had planned that morning the way I planned everything, with enough structure to feel held and enough space to feel like it was still mine. My mother arrived at 7. Camille at 7:15, carrying a speaker and a playlist she'd been building for 2 weeks. My bridesmaids, Sasha and Portia, came together at 7:30 with enough food to feed the floor. The room smelled like fresh flowers and Camille's perfume, and the specific kind of warmth that only happens when women who love each other are in the same space preparing for something important. I was in the dressing area at 9:40 in my robe, while the stylist worked on my hair, when I heard the knock. 3 knocks, specific, the kind that doesn't ask permission. Camille got to the door first. I heard the pause before I heard the voice. "I need to speak with Eliana, alone." "Rochelle." Camille appeared in the dressing area doorway. Her expression was the one she reserved for situations that required her to be calm on the surface, while something entirely different ran underneath. "It's Rochelle," she said. "She says it's important." I looked at myself in the mirror for exactly 1 moment. Hair half-pinned, robe-tied, gold tragus earring already in. I looked like a woman who had not yet become a bride. I decided that was fine. "Give us the room," I said. My mother started to say something. I caught her eye. She stopped, set down her coffee cup, and followed Camille and the others, out with the quiet dignity of a woman who had raised a daughter she trusted completely. The stylist gathered her tools and excused herself. The door to the sitting room closed with a soft click. Rochelle walked in. She was dressed in what I can only describe as a considered choice, a ivory-wrapped dress that stopped just above the knee, fitted with a deep V neckline, and a silhouette that had clearly been selected with attention. Her hair was pressed bone straight, falling past her shoulders. Her makeup was done with the kind of precision that takes 90 minutes to look effortless. The small beauty mark above the left corner of her mouth looked darker than usual against her golden caramel skin. She looked without question like a woman who had dressed to stand out at a wedding. She sat down in the chair across from my dressing table without being invited and crossed her legs at the ankle. I stayed in my chair, half turned toward her, and waited. I was not going to speak first. I had learned that about Rochelle. She needed the other person to fill silence before she felt safe, and I was not prepared to give her that. She lasted 9 seconds. "I think you should call it off," she said. "Not I have concerns. Not I need to tell you something. Straight to it." I respected the efficiency even as everything in me went very still. "Tell me why," I said. She uncrossed and recrossed her ankles. "Derek isn't ready. He thinks he is. He loves you. I'm not saying he doesn't. But there are things about our family, about our financial situation, that you don't fully understand. Things that are going to affect your life in ways you haven't prepared for." "What things?" A pause, smaller than she intended. "It's complicated." "I'm a corporate attorney," I said. "I work in complicated." Something moved across her face. Not quite irritation. Something closer to recalibration. She'd expected tears, maybe, or defensiveness. She'd come prepared for an emotional conversation, and I was not giving her one. She leaned forward slightly. "Eliana, I'm trying to help you. You're walking into something you don't have the full picture of. Derek has obligations, financial obligations, that he hasn't told you about. Family obligations. Things that were in place long before you came into his life, and that aren't going to disappear because he put a ring on your finger. Does Derek know you're here?" Another pause, longer this time. "That's not relevant." "It's very relevant," I said. "Because if my fiancé sent his sister to deliver a message about his own financial obligations, that's one conversation. And if you came here without his knowledge to make decisions you have no authority to make, that's a completely different one." Her jaw tightened. Just slightly. A small tightening of the muscle along the left side of her face. I noted it. "He was fine," she said then, and her voice had shifted lower, less managed, more true. "Before you came along. There it was. Not concern for Derek. Not family loyalty dressed in careful language. Just that. Simple, unguarded, finally honest. He was fine before you came along. Meaning he was mine before you came along. Meaning I had a version of him that worked for me and you interrupted it." I looked at her for a long moment. Outside, I could hear the faint sound of the string quartet rehearsing 3 floors below. Someone in the hallway laughed a bridesmaid from someone else's wedding, high and bright and uncomplicated. "Rochelle," I said, and I kept my voice exactly level. "I need you to hear me clearly. I am going to walk down that aisle in approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes. Nothing you've said in this room changes that. Nothing you could say changes that. What I'd like you to consider carefully is the decision you're making about how you show up today. Because some decisions made in one morning take years to recover from." She stood, smoothed the front of her ivory dress with both hands, looked at me in the mirror. "You don't know what I know," she said. "You'd be surprised," I said. She left. The door to the sitting room opened and closed. I heard the outer door a moment later. Then silence. I sat in my dressing chair and looked at my own reflection for 30 seconds. Then I picked up my phone and sent a single text to Vivian. She came. We're still on. Use everything. Vivian's response came back in under a minute. Already ahead of you. See you at the altar. I want to tell you about the night before the wedding because people always get that part wrong. In movies, the night before is candlelight and champagne and bridesmaids braiding each other's hair and crying over how far you've all come. Maybe that happened somewhere. It didn't happen in my hotel room at the Biltmore on the Friday night before I married Derek Calloway. What happened was, this Camille fell asleep on the pull-out sofa at 10:15 with the television on. My mother called to say goodnight and told me 3 times that I looked beautiful, which she hadn't seen yet, which was the most my mother thing she had ever done. Sasha and Portia had gone back to their own room after dinner. The suite was quiet in the way that expensive hotel rooms are quiet. A thick, insulated silence that doesn't feel like peace, so much as the absence of everything outside. I sat at the small writing desk near the window with a cup of chamomile tea I'd ordered from room service, and my laptop open to a document I'd been adding to for 11 months. The document was titled Calloway Personal Notes. It was not a journal. I don't keep journals. It was a record dates observations, specific language used in specific conversations, amounts, names, timelines. The kind of document I would build for a client before a deposition. Precise, organized, admissible in the way that personal records sometimes have to be. I scrolled through it slowly, not reading so much as confirming, letting the structure of it settle me the way a well-prepared case file settles me the morning before I walk into a courtroom. Then I picked up my phone and called Vivian. She answered on the second ring. It was 10:51 at night. She sounded exactly as she had at 2 in the afternoon, alert, unhurried, already 3 steps ahead of the current moment. That was the thing about Vivian Cole. She did not experience time the way other people did. She experienced it as a series of logistics, and she was always current. I was expecting your call, she said, not unkindly. Tell me where we are, I said. She told me, methodically in the order that mattered. The venue was confirmed and locked. The florist had done a final walkthrough and everything was exactly as specified. The photographer Janelle had her shot list and had been explicitly told that all communication went through me or Vivian, no one else. The string quartet had confirmed the ceremony program. The catering captain had a copy of the seating chart with the updated table 4 arrangement, following the Whitfield family's quiet withdrawal and the substitution I'd made. And the other matter, I said. A brief pause, not hesitation. Vivian didn't hesitate. It was the pause of someone selecting the right level of precision. I made contact with the relevant party this afternoon, she said. Everything you sent me is documented. I've kept copies in 3 places. If she shows up tomorrow, and I think she will, because women like Rochelle always show up, I'll be positioned near the east entrance. That's where the sight lines are best, and that's where she'll want to be seen. 1 sentence, I said. That's all I want. 1 sentence is all it'll take, Vivian said. You've done the work, Eliana. Tomorrow I just deliver it. I looked out the window at Peachtree Street below. Friday night in Atlanta, the restaurant still lit a few couples walking a rideshare pulling up to the hotel entrance. Normal city sounds muffled through the glass. A Friday night that had no idea what Saturday was going to be. Can I ask you something, I said. Of course. In your career, all the weddings you've done, have you ever seen something like this? A family member who couldn't let it happen. Vivian was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had a quality it didn't usually have. Something older in it. More times than I wish I had, she said. And in my experience, it is never actually about the wedding. The wedding is just the deadline. It's about whatever the person is losing or thinks they're losing when the ceremony ends. The ceremony makes it permanent in a way that dating, even long engagement, doesn't. Some people can live with a relationship. They cannot live with a marriage. I thought about Rochelle in the bridal suite that morning. The way her voice had shifted when she said he was fine before you came along. The way it had dropped its careful packaging and just said what it meant. She's not going to stop after tomorrow, I said. Even if everything goes the way it's supposed to go. No, Vivian said. She's not. But after tomorrow, she'll be working from a different position. And so will you. We were quiet for a moment together, outside a car horn, then nothing. Get some sleep, Vivian said. You have a wedding in the morning. I know. Eliana. Yes. You are not the one who should be nervous tomorrow. I almost smiled. I'm not nervous. I know you're not, she said. I just wanted to say it out loud. We hung up. I closed the laptop. I finished the chamomile tea, which had gone lukewarm, and I rinsed the cup in the bathroom sink out of habit. I changed into the sleep set my mother had given me, ivory silk, which I now found faintly amusing. I turned off the lamp on my side of the suite. Camille was still asleep on the pull-out, breathing slowly, the television cycling through a home renovation show with the volume at 3. I lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling. I did not cry. I did not spiral. I ran through the structure of what I knew the way I might run through an opening argument, not searching for holes anymore, just feeling the weight of it, the solidity of the preparation. When you've done the work, there's a specific kind of calm that comes. Not the absence of stakes, just the presence of readiness. I thought about Derek. The real Derek, not the one filtered through Rochelle's management of him. Not the one I'd been quietly, carefully watching for fault lines over 11 months. The one who had called 3 days after the fundraiser. Who had reset my grandmother's ring. Who thought before he spoke and meant it when he did. I thought about what it was going to mean to be married to him. What I was walking toward. I decided before I fell asleep that whatever Rochelle had tried to build in the space between us, all the delayed vendors, the redirected calls, the Whitfield RSVPs, the bridal suite visit, all of it, none of it had changed what I actually knew about Derek. It had changed what I knew about Rochelle. And tomorrow, Vivian was going to change what everyone else knew about Rochelle too. I closed my eyes at 11:47. I did not set an alarm. I had never needed one the morning of anything that mattered. The morning of my wedding, Atlanta decided to be perfect. I don't say that lightly. I grew up in this city. I know what October in Atlanta actually is. The temperature can't make up its mind. The sky goes from clear to complicated in 40 minutes, and the humidity lingers past the point where it should have given up. But that Saturday came in like something that had been ordered specifically. 64 degrees by 9 in the morning. Light that hit the Biltmore's east-facing windows at an angle that made everything look slightly more significant than it was. The kind of morning that makes even skeptical people consider the possibility that some days are chosen. I was up at 6:15 without an alarm. I showered, made coffee from the in-room machine, and sat by the window in my silk sleep set and watched Peachtree Street wake up while Camille was still breathing slowly on the pull-out. I didn't check my phone for 40 minutes. I just sat there with my coffee and watched the city, which is something I almost never let myself do. My mother arrived at 7 with my Aunt Dolores, who cried the moment she saw me and then apologized for crying, which made me laugh, which made her cry more. The room filled up the same way it had the day before, incrementally warmly, with the specific texture of women who had known me long enough to love me without performance. By 10:30, I was in my dress. It was an ivory column gown, with a structured bodice and a low open back, the kind of dress that didn't need embellishment, because the cut was the statement. My grandmother's reset ring was on my right hand temporarily to be moved during the ceremony. My locks were up in a sculptured updo that my stylist had spent 2 hours building, with 2 small tendrils pulled free at the temples. The gold tragus earring was already in. I added a pair of long gold drop earrings that had been my grandmother's, and stood in front of the full-length mirror and looked at myself for a long, private moment. I looked like a woman who had decided something and arrived at it fully. Camille stood behind me and put both hands on my shoulders without saying anything. She's known me since the second year of law school. She knew when I needed words and when I needed the weight of her hands. That morning, it was the hands. Vivienne arrived at 10:50 for the final walkthrough. She came into the suite in her signature, a perfectly tailored dove gray suit, small pearl earrings, a tablet in one hand, and an earpiece she never seemed to actually use, but always wore. She looked at me, did a single slow assessment from hem to updo, and said, "Perfect. We're on schedule. Cars in 40. She started to leave. I said her name. She turned. "Is she here?" I asked. Vivienne looked at me for a moment. Then, "She arrived 12 minutes ago. East entrance as I expected. She checked in with the guest coordinator using her invitation. The invitation was valid, so she was admitted." A small pause. "She's wearing white." The room went quiet. Not because anyone gasped. Because everyone understood simultaneously what that meant and chose not to fill the understanding with noise. My mother set down her coffee cup. Camille's hands stayed on my shoulders. Sasha, near the window, turned to look at me. I looked at Vivienne. "What kind of white?" "Floor length. Fitted through the bodice, off shoulder. A veil, not a wedding veil, a decorative one, but long. She is making no attempt to be subtle." Another pause. "She looks to anyone who sees her before understanding the context like a second bride." I heard Sasha exhale. Heard my Aunt Dolores say something low under her breath in a register that meant prayer or profanity with Aunt Dolores. The line was always contextual. I turned back to the mirror. Straightened the drop earring on my left side, which didn't need straightening. Did it anyway. "Let her," I said. Vivienne nodded once. She'd heard this from me before. What I had not prepared for, what I could not have fully prepared for, even with all my preparation, was the specific texture of walking into that ballroom and seeing it with my own eyes. I came down the main staircase at 11:45 on my father's arm. The ceremony wasn't until noon, but I needed to walk the space once before it filled the way it would when the music started, and my father needed a moment with me that wasn't shared with 200 people. We walked the length of the room, slowly. He told me about the day I was born, a story I'd heard 40 times that I will never stop wanting to hear. And then I saw her. Rochelle was positioned near the east windows, where the light was best. She knew the light was best there. She was in event planning. She stood in the ivory to white gown. It was white, fully white. No question, with the decorative veil draped over one shoulder like a statement. Several guests had noticed her. I could see it in the way eyes moved in the small clusters of conversation that paused when people looked in her direction and resumed with a different quality. She saw me, for a moment, just a fraction of one. Something moved across her face. Something that might have been uncertainty. Then the smile came back. Confident, practiced. Derek was on the other side of the room with his groomsmen, not yet having seen her. His mother, Gloria, stood near the family table speaking with relatives, her back to Rochelle. And then, something I had not planned happened, which is that Derek's cousin Marcus, 22 years old, not known for his discretion, said loudly enough to carry, "Yo, why is Rochelle dressed like that?" Heads turned. Gloria turned. I watched Gloria see her daughter. I had wondered in all my months of preparation what Gloria knew. I had never been able to fully determine it. But watching her face in the moment she turned and saw Rochelle standing in white at her son's wedding, I got my answer. Gloria knew something. And she had hoped it would not arrive here in this room in this form. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them and looked straight ahead and did not look at Rochelle again. Derek had turned now. He had seen his sister. I watched him process it, the white dress, the decorative veil, the placement, the attention she'd drawn. I watched his face do something I had not seen it do before. Not anger, not confusion. A kind of slow, arriving comprehension, like a man who has been handed a document he didn't know existed and is reading the first page. He looked at me across the room. I looked back at him steadily from my father's arm. I did not signal distress. I did not look away. I just looked at him the way I had looked at Rochelle in the bridal suite, with the particular stillness of someone who has already done the work and is no longer afraid of the result. Vivian appeared at the edge of my peripheral vision, moving quietly toward the east windows. And the string quartet on cue began to play. I want to be precise about what happened next, because the story has a way of getting bigger in the retelling. People who were there have described it differently depending on where they were standing. Some say they heard what Vivian said. Some say they only saw Rochelle's face change and drew their own conclusions. Some, the ones closest to the east windows, say they heard nothing at all, but watched a woman who had walked into that ballroom like she owned it, leave it like she was being quietly escorted from a building she'd been trespassed from. What I know is what I saw and what Vivian told me afterward, word for word. She approached Rochelle from the left side, which was deliberate. It put Vivian between Rochelle and the main cluster of guests, creating a visual privacy that was, in fact, the opposite of private, because anyone watching would understand that something was being communicated without being able to hear it. Vivian had done this before. She understood that the geometry of a conversation was sometimes more powerful than its content. She stopped close enough that Rochelle would have to respond without raising her voice. Vivian was 2 inches shorter than Rochelle in heels, and it did not matter at all. She said, "The amended deed of transfer was filed with Fulton County last Tuesday. Eliana's attorney has the receipt." That was it. That was the sentence. 11 words. Rochelle's face and I was watching from across the room. I did not have the detail Vivian would give me later, but I had enough. Went through 3 distinct phases in approximately 4 seconds. The first was confusion. The automatic response of someone who has heard something unexpected and is trying to locate the correct reaction. The second was recognition. Quiet, devastating recognition, the kind that doesn't arrive loudly but lands in the chest like something dropped from a height. The third was the absence of the smile. The smile just stopped. Not dropped. Stopped. Like a signal cut. Her right hand, holding a champagne flute she'd taken from a passing tray, went very still. Vivian stood there for exactly as long as it took Rochelle to understand the full implication of what had been said. Then she inclined her head slightly, not a bow, not a nod. Just the precise movement of a woman concluding a professional exchange, and walked away. Let me tell you what the amended deed of transfer was. 7 months before the wedding, while I was building my folder of things I was not yet ready to name, I had noticed something in the financial conversation Rochelle had tried to have with me. In the bridal suite, something she had referenced without meaning to. She had said there were family financial obligations in place that I didn't understand. She had said there were things that were there before I came and that weren't going away when Derek put a ring on my finger. I had filed that language carefully. Then I'd done what I was trained to do. I pulled property records. I pulled corporate filings for every LLC and holding entity connected to the Calloway family name. In Fulton County, I had a colleague at a real estate firm run a quiet title search on 3 addresses that had come up in passing conversation over the course of the engagement. What I found on the second address was a deed of transfer that had been executed 18 months before Derek proposed to me. A property, a 4-unit residential building in the West End neighborhood that had belonged to Derek's grandfather and passed to Derek as the eldest grandchild had been quietly transferred out of Derek's name into Rochelle's. Not sold, transferred. At a consideration of $1, which in Georgia property law is a legal but functionally meaningless price that signals a gift or a manipulation, depending on context. The transfer had been executed with a notary and 2 witnesses and filed without Derek's knowledge. I would confirm this later, but I already suspected it then, because the signature on the transfer document was Derek's name, in a hand that didn't match any of the documents Derek had signed in my presence. Someone had signed Derek's name. Someone who had access to his personal documents, his notarized signature samples, and the kind of quiet time with family paperwork that only a person on the inside would have. Rochelle had transferred a property out of her brother's name into her own, using what appeared to be a forged signature 18 months before his wedding. And then she had come to the bridal suite the morning of the ceremony to tell his bride that there were financial complications she didn't understand. She wasn't warning me away from Derek's problems. She was trying to get ahead of her own. The amended deed of transfer I had filed last Tuesday through my own attorney, a quiet correction to the property record that initiated a formal challenge to the original transfer, meant that the document Rochelle had believed was buried in a county filing system was now the subject of an active legal proceeding. It meant that what she had done was no longer a private family matter she could manage from the inside. It meant she had run out of time. This is what Vivian communicated in 11 words in a Buckhead ballroom to a woman in a white dress who had come to a wedding to make herself the story. I watched Rochelle set the champagne flute down on the nearest surface, a small cocktail table near the east windows. She set it down carefully, which told me more than anything else. She was still in control of her body. She was choosing each movement. She was a woman processing a crisis in real time and deciding the order of operations. She looked across the room, not at me, at Derek. And I watched something happen on her face that I did not expect and that I have thought about many times since. It was not calculation. It was not the next tactical move. It was something that looked briefly, just briefly, like grief. Like the face of someone who had gone too far in a direction they couldn't reverse and had just felt the full weight of that for the first time. It lasted less than 3 seconds. Then it was gone. She smoothed the front of the white dress with both hands, the same gesture she had made in the bridal suite. I noticed the same self-steadying motion and began to move toward Derek. Derek was standing near the groomsmen's staging area when Rochelle reached him. It was a narrow corridor of space. Between the east wall and the first row of ceremony chairs, not private, not public, exactly the kind of in-between geography that people who need to say something they haven't prepared for always seem to find. His groomsmen had drifted toward the bar cart in the antechamber. His best man, a college friend named Warren, was the only one still nearby, and Warren, to his credit, read the room and took 3 steps back without being asked. I was 30 feet away, still on my father's arm, and I did not move closer. I did not need to. I had done everything I needed to do before this moment. What happened in that corridor was between Derek and his sister, and it was always going to have to be. Rochelle spoke first. She was close enough to him that I couldn't hear the words, only the register of them, low and quick with the specific rhythm of someone delivering information under pressure. She was not crying. She was explaining, managing, still even now trying to get in front of it. I watched Derek's face. He listened. He didn't interrupt, which was like him. Derek always let a person finish before he responded. It was one of the things I'd loved about him from the beginning, that patience. The way he held space for what someone was saying before he decided what to do with it. But I had never seen him listen to something and go that still. He was not moving, not nodding, not doing any of the small physical things people do when they're receiving information. They're integrating the slight lean, the blink, the shift of weight. He was simply standing, both hands at his sides, the gold signet ring on his right hand, catching the light from the chandeliers above, and listening to his sister tell him something that was rearranging what he thought he knew. She finished. There was a pause. Derek looked down at the floor for a moment. Not in defeat. It wasn't that kind of looking down. It was the look of a man doing structural calculations in his head, measuring load, checking for failure points. Then he looked up at Rochelle. And I want to be careful here, because what happened next has been described in ways I don't fully recognize. Some of the guests who noticed the exchange have said Derek raised his voice. He didn't. Some have said there was a scene. There wasn't not in the way people mean when they say scene. What there was a quality of silence around the two of them that radiated outward and made the people nearby go quiet without understanding why, the way animals go still before weather arrives. What Derek said, I learned this from Warren, who was close enough to hear, was 4 sentences. Is it your signature on the transfer document? Rochelle said it wasn't. Is it my signature? She didn't answer. Derek looked at his sister for a long moment. Then he said quietly and completely without heat, you need to leave. Not I need you to leave. Not please leave. You need to leave with the specific grammatical construction of a person identifying a truth rather than issuing a command. As though leaving was not a punishment he was assigning her, but a condition she had created for herself, and he was simply naming it out loud. Rochelle stood very still for a moment. The white dress caught the chandelier light. The decorative veil moved slightly with the air conditioning, a small, involuntary movement that seemed to belong to a different scene. Entirely something softer and more innocent than the one that was actually happening. She said, Derek, Rochelle. Just her name. The way you say someone's name when you have run out of the particular kind of patience that belongs specifically to loving someone. She left, not quickly. That was the thing that surprised me. I had expected from everything I knew about Rochelle a dramatic exit, the kind of leaving that made itself a statement that turned heads and demanded interpretation. But she didn't do that. She walked toward the west exit, not the east entrance she'd come in from, at a measured pace, her heels clicking on the marble in that same slow rhythm I described in the hook, the one that had been designed to be heard on the way in. On the way out, nobody was listening for it anymore. 200 guests in varying states of awareness watched or didn't watch Rochelle Calloway leave her brother's wedding in a white dress 12 minutes before the ceremony began. The ones who understood what they were seeing were quiet about it, the way people who've witnessed something real are often quieter than people who haven't. The ones who didn't understand exchanged small glances and returned to their conversations, filing it in the mental category of things that would be explained later. Gloria Calloway did not turn around. She was standing at the family table with her sister and her sister's husband, speaking in the deliberate, continuous way of a woman who has decided that whatever is happening behind her is not in this moment going to happen to her. Her shoulders were perfectly level. Her pearls were exactly straight. She was in that moment the most composed person in the room, and I had understood completely that composure was costing her something considerable. I would speak to Gloria about all of it later. Not that day was not the day for it, but later and honestly, and with the particular care that the situation required. Gloria was not Rochelle. She was a woman who had protected her family by not asking certain questions, and there was a difference between that and what her daughter had done. I had decided that distinction mattered, and I intended to honor it. Derek crossed the room. He walked directly to me, not hurrying, not performing, just moving with the directness of a man who has identified where he needs to be and is going there. He stopped in front of me and my father, and he looked at me with an expression I had not seen on him before, and have only seen a handful of times since. It was the expression of someone who has just learned that the person standing in front of them is more than they had already understood them to be, and is recalibrating accordingly. He said, "How long have you known?" "Long enough to handle it before it became your problem," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "You filed the deed challenge." "My attorney did, yes." "Before the wedding?" Before the wedding, he looked at me for a long time. The string quartet had paused for a brief transition into the processional warm-up. The room was moving around us, guests, finding seats, ushers completing final rounds. Vivienne materializing briefly at the edge of my vision, to give me the smallest nod before disappearing again. My father put his hand briefly on Derek's shoulder, a single, wordless gesture, and then stepped back to give us the 2 feet of privacy that 2 feet can give in a room of 200 people. Derek reached out and adjusted the gold drop earring on my left side. Gently, the way he touched things he was careful with. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it. For the parts I didn't see and the parts I should have." "I know," I said. "Are you ready?" I looked at him, at the signet ring on his right hand, at the face of the man who had called 3 days later, and meant it, at the person I had chosen, with my eyes open and my documents filed, and my attorney on standby, and my folder of 11 items sitting in a cloud backup on a server in Midtown Atlanta. "I've been ready," I said. "I was just waiting for you to catch up." He almost smiled. Then he did smile. My father appeared at my side. Warren reappeared at Derek's. The string quartet resolved into the opening notes of the processional. And 200 people who had just watched something they didn't fully understand settled into their seats and prepared to watch something they did. The ceremony took 31 minutes. I know because I looked at the time afterward, not during, never during, and did the arithmetic. 31 minutes from the first note of the processional to the moment the officiant said, "You may kiss your bride," and Derek did quietly, without theater, the way he did most things that mattered to him. In those 31 minutes, 200 people witnessed something that had nothing to do with Rochelle. They witnessed a marriage. The real kind, the kind that had been tested before it was sealed, that arrived at the altar already knowing what it could survive. I held Derek's hands and said words I had written myself, sitting at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night 3 months before. And I meant every syllable of them in the specific way you can only mean something you've earned the right to say. My mother cried. Aunt Dolores cried and didn't apologize this time. Warren cried and pretended he wasn't, which Derek would bring up at every anniversary dinner for the rest of their friendship. I did not cry. Not because I wasn't feeling it, because I was feeling it too completely for tears, which are what happen when emotion needs somewhere to go. Mine had nowhere to go because it was already exactly where it was supposed to be. When we walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, the room was warm with the sound of 200 people applauding something genuine. And I thought briefly and completely about Rochelle in her white dress walking toward the west exit on her measured heels, and I felt nothing vindictive. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was closer to sorrow. The specific sorrow of watching someone choose over and over the version of a story where they are the center until the story finally moves on without them. The reception began at 1 o'clock. By 1:45, Rochelle's name was in the air. Not loudly. Not in the way of a scandal announced in the way of a question that spreads through a room of people who already know each other. Moving from table to table in the form of a raised eyebrow, a lowered voice. A glance toward the Calloway family table, where Gloria sat with her chin at exactly the same height it had been all morning. The Whitfields were there. Not at table 4, I had moved them to table 2, closer to the family after their quiet withdrawal from the original seating. Harold Whitfield, 71 years old, white hair and a navy suit, had shaken my hand during cocktail hour with both of his and said, "Your grandmother would have liked this very much." He had known my grandmother. I hadn't known that. I held on to that sentence for a long time. It was Harold Whitfield's daughter, Patricia, late 40s, a property attorney who worked in the same building as one of my firm's partners, who first said the words out loud in my presence. We were standing near the dessert table during the first hour of the reception, when Patricia touched my arm lightly and said in the tone of someone who has decided that honesty is a form of respect, "Eliana, I need to tell you that we know about the West End property. My father knew about it before the wedding. That's why they withdrew initially. Harold didn't know how to tell Derek without—" She paused, selected her words. "Without making it worse than it needed to be." I looked at her steadily. "How long have you known?" 4 months. My father recognized the signature on the transfer document when someone brought it to his attention. He'd seen Derek sign things for years. It wasn't Derek's signature. Who brought it to his attention? A pause. Gloria. I was quiet for a moment. The dessert table was decorated with small gold-rimmed plates and a tiered cake that Camille had nearly cried over when she'd seen it at the tasting. Somewhere behind me, the DJ was transitioning from dinner music to the first dance set. Gloria had known. Not everything. I didn't think she knew the full shape of it. But she had seen the signature on the transfer document, and she had recognized that it wasn't her son's. And she had gone to Harold Whitfield quietly, the way women of her generation handled certain things, not through confrontation, not through legal channels, but through the oldest available mechanism, a trusted family friend who happened to have relevant expertise. And Harold had withdrawn his family from the wedding rather than arrive with the weight of what he knew, not yet sure whether to speak or wait. I thought about Gloria, closing her eyes for 2 seconds when she saw Rochelle in the white dress. I thought about the cost of that composure. "Thank you for telling me," I said to Patricia. She nodded. "For what it's worth, what you did with the deed challenge was the right move. Clean, legal, no drama." "That was the intention," I said. She smiled at me, a real one, the kind that reaches the eyes, and moved back toward her table. By 2:30, the dominoes had begun to fall in the particular way that dominoes fall in a community of people who have known each other for decades, not all at once, but continuously, each one setting off the next with a small, inevitable click. Someone at table 6 had a cousin who worked in property management in the West End. Someone at table 9 had sold the Callaways their first investment property 20 years ago and had opinions about how that portfolio had been managed since. Someone at table 11 was a clerk at the Fulton County Register of Deeds who had processed enough transfer documents to know what a $1 consideration meant and what it didn't. The information moved through the room the way information always moves in small, interconnected communities, not like a wave loud and visible, but like water through soil. Quiet, pervasive, already everywhere by the time anyone thought to look. Derek's phone buzzed at 2:47. He looked at it, showed me the screen, and set it face down on the table. It was his Aunt Sandra Gloria's sister texting from table 3, 12 feet away. The message was 4 words. "We need to talk." Then at 3:15, Gloria did something I will remember for the rest of my life. She stood up from the family table, smoothed the front of her dress, walked across the reception hall to where I was standing with Camille near the photo station, and took both of my hands in hers. She was shorter than me by 2 inches, and she held my hands with the grip of someone who had decided that whatever this moment cost her, it was going to be paid in full. She looked at me for a moment without speaking. Her eyes were dry. I don't think Gloria Calloway had cried in public since 1987, and I don't think she was going to start at her son's wedding. "I should have said something sooner," she said. "You did what you could with what you had," I said. "That's generous." "It's accurate." She looked at me for another moment. Then she did something I had not expected. She reached up and touched my cheek briefly with 2 fingers, the way an older woman touches a younger one when she is acknowledging something she doesn't have words for. "Welcome to this family," she said. The real version of it. Then she went back to her table, sat down, picked up her champagne glass, and resumed her conversation with her sister as though she had only stepped away to check on a guest. Across the room, Derek watched the whole exchange. He met my eyes afterward, and I saw something shift in his face, something that had been held carefully for a long time, releasing just slightly, like a structure that has been checked and found sound. Outside in the Buckhead afternoon, wherever Rochelle had gone after she walked through the west exit in her white dress on her measured heels, the amended deed of transfer was sitting in the Fulton County system, patient and permanent, waiting for whatever came next. Some things don't need you to watch them work. Derek and I didn't have a traditional honeymoon. We had planned 2 weeks in Portugal, Lisbon, and the Alentejo region, a place Derek had wanted to go since his graduate program, and kept deferring because there was always a reason to defer. We still went. But the 2 weeks we spent there were different from what either of us had imagined, because we spent a significant portion of them on terraces overlooking the Tagus River, over late dinners in small restaurants with no English menus, walking through cork oak forests in the kind of afternoon quiet that makes conversation feel necessary and unhurried, talking about what we had come home from. Derek is not a man who processes quickly. He processes correctly. There's a difference. He needed the full shape of a thing before he could speak about it honestly. And I had learned early in our relationship that pushing him toward a conclusion before he'd arrived at it naturally produced a version of Derek that was cooperative but not fully present. So I waited. I answered questions when he asked them. I showed him the folder on my laptop on the third evening in Lisbon, the one titled Callaway Personal Notes. And I sat across from him at the small table on our hotel balcony and let him read it while I drank a glass of Alentejo Red and looked at the river. He read for 22 minutes. He didn't say anything while he read. When he finished, he closed the laptop, gently set it on the table, and looked out at the river for a long time. Then he said, "How did you know I didn't know about the transfer?" "I didn't know for certain," I said. "But you signed your name in front of me 11 times over 14 months. On contracts, on checks, on a birthday card for Warren. I know your handwriting. What was on that document, wasn't it?" He was quiet for a moment. "I would have done something, if I'd known." "I know," I said. "That's not why I handled it the way I did." Then why? I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because if I had come to you with it, you would have confronted Rochelle. And Rochelle would have managed the confrontation. She's been managing you your whole life, Derek. She knows how to work around your love for her. I needed it to be out of her reach before she knew it existed. He absorbed that. The Whitfields. Harold knew before I did. Gloria went to him. Something moved across his face. My mother knew. She saw the signature and she recognized it wasn't yours. She didn't know the full extent of it, but she knew enough to be afraid of what she didn't know. He set down his wine glass, picked it up again, set it down. Rochelle has been... He stopped, started again. She's been the person I protected for 30 years, since we were kids. She was always... She needed more than I did. More attention, more reassurance, more of everything. My parents gave it to her because it was easier than the alternative, and I gave it to her because I loved her, and because it was just how things were. "I know," I said. "I didn't see what that became." "You saw parts of it. You chose not to name them." He looked at me. "Is that a criticism?" "It's an observation," I said. "You can do what you want with it." He almost smiled. It was a tired smile, the kind that comes at the end of something, not the beginning. "You're going to be a very interesting person to be married to." "You already knew that." "I knew it abstractly," he said. "I'm starting to understand it concretely." We went to bed late that night, and the conversation didn't end so much as it paused, the way long conversations between people who have time do not resolved, just rested, to be picked up tomorrow or the day after or in 6 months when a new piece of it became relevant. When we returned to Atlanta, the full picture had come into focus the way pictures do when you've been away and the people still inside it have had time to talk to each other without you. The West End property matter had been referred by my attorney to a forensic document examiner who confirmed within 2 weeks of our return what I had already known: the signature on the transfer document was not Derek's. The examination report identified 17 specific variances from Derek's authenticated signature samples. 17. Rochelle had not been careless so much as she had been confident that no one would look, that the filing was buried, that Derek's trust in her was deep enough to survive whatever might surface. She had been right about the depth of his trust. She had miscalculated everything else. The legal process moved with the specific, unhurried momentum of civil property law, not dramatic, not fast, but inevitable, in the way that formally initiated proceedings are inevitable. My attorney filed the full challenge. The transfer was suspended, pending resolution. The West End property? 4 residential units, 2 of which were currently rented to tenants who had no idea any of this was happening, and were simply paying their rent on time, and living their lives, was frozen in a legal holding pattern that would take months to fully resolve. Rochelle retained an attorney. That was the first thing we heard from her after the wedding. Not a call, not a message, but a letter from a law firm in Sandy Springs that arrived addressed to Derek at our new shared address, which he had somehow obtained, which told us more than the letter itself did. Derek read the letter and gave it to my attorney without responding to it personally. That was one of the hardest things I watched him do, not because he was angry, but because he wasn't. The anger would have been easier for him. What he was grieving. Grieving the version of his sister he had believed in for 30 years. Grieving the family story that had required, as it turned out, a significant amount of selective blindness to maintain. Gloria called him every Sunday. Their conversations were shorter than they used to be, and different in quality, not cold, but careful, in the way of 2 people who are being honest with each other for the first time after a long period of being careful. I did not listen to those calls. I gave him the room and went to my office and worked, because work was where I'd always put things that needed somewhere to go while I waited for them to become something I could name. The community knew. That was simply true, and there was no managing it. Atlanta's black professional class is large enough to feel like a city, and small enough to function like a neighborhood. And what had happened at the Calloway wedding, the white dress, the exit, the legal proceedings that followed, was the kind of story that moves because it contains the specific elements that stories in close communities always move on: money, family, loyalty, and the question of who knew what and when. I was asked about it exactly twice in professional contexts. Once by a partner at my firm who framed it as checking in, but was clearly gathering information. Once by a woman at a bar association event who was less subtle about it. Both times I said the same thing. It was a family matter being handled through appropriate legal channels, and I appreciated the concern. I did not perform injury. I did not perform triumph. Both would have been dishonest, and I had worked too hard on the truth of the thing to compromise it now with a performance in either direction. What I felt in the weeks and months after the wedding was something I had not entirely anticipated: a deep, quiet relief. Not because Rochelle had been exposed, that was never the satisfaction I was looking for, but because I was no longer carrying the weight of knowing something that Derek didn't know. That weight had been significant. I hadn't fully understood how significant until it was gone. Derek noticed. About 3 weeks after we returned from Portugal, on a Sunday morning in our kitchen, we had moved into a house in Kirkwood, a 3-bedroom craftsman with a back porch that faced east. He looked at me over his coffee and said, "You seem lighter." "I am lighter," I said. "How long were you carrying it?" 11 months. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry you had to do that alone." "I wasn't alone," I said. "I had Vivian." He laughed, a real one, unexpected, The kind that meant something had been released rather than produced. Your wedding planner. My wedding planner, I said, who I will be recommending to every person I know for the rest of my life. Outside the kitchen window, the Kirkwood morning was doing what Atlanta October mornings do when they're being cooperative. Clear light, a slight cool edge. The neighborhood just beginning to come alive with the sounds of dogs and coffee and people moving through their Sundays. Normal life on the other side of everything. Derek reached across the kitchen island and put his hand over mine. The gold signet ring was warm from the coffee cup. What happens now? He said. We live here, I said. In this house, in this marriage. We handle what comes through the legal process when it comes. And we stop letting other people's decisions about us become our emergency. He looked at me for a long moment. That's going to take some practice, he said. I know, I said. We have time. There is a photograph from my wedding that I didn't know existed until 3 weeks after we returned from Portugal. Janelle, the photographer, sent over the full gallery, 412 images organized by moment, and lit the way only someone who understands light as a language can light them. I went through them slowly over 2 evenings on my laptop at the kitchen table, while Derek read in the next room. Most of them were what I expected, and more than I had hoped for. The ceremony shots were exactly right. The first dance was better than I remembered it feeling. There was a candid of my mother and Aunt Dolores at table 3 that I printed and framed before I finished going through the rest of the gallery. But the photograph I didn't know existed was taken at 11:53 in the morning, 7 minutes before the processional began. It is a wide shot from the back of the ballroom. Janelle had been doing a final equipment check and had her camera up when it happened. She told me later, and she almost didn't include it because she wasn't sure it belonged with the wedding photographs. Then she looked at it again and decided it was the most wedding photograph of all of them. In the shot, the ballroom is full of guests finding their seats. The chandeliers are lit. The ceremony chairs are arranged in their curved rows. The flowers are exactly as I specified. In the foreground, on the left, slightly blurred, is the edge of a white dress moving toward the west exit. In the middle distance, Derek is crossing the room. And in the right side of the frame, in full focus, is me standing with my father's hand on my arm. In my ivory column gown, my locks pinned up the gold drop earrings, catching the light, looking forward. Not at Rochelle, not at Derek yet, just forward. My expression in the photograph is not triumphant. It's not relieved. It's not performing anything. It is the expression of a woman who has done the work and is now simply present for what the work was in service of. Janelle titled it in the gallery metadata "The Bride, 11:53 a.m. I have looked at that photograph many times since. Not because it documents what happened with Rochelle, it barely does. That the white dress in the corner is almost incidental. But because it documents something I want to remember about myself. The fact that I was there fully for the thing I had built. That I didn't spend the ceremony looking sideways at what was leaving. That I looked forward. The legal proceedings took 14 months to resolve. The forensic examination, the formal challenge, the response from Rochelle's attorney, the mediation attempt that didn't hold the eventual settlement. It moved the way civil property matters move, which is to say slowly and without drama and with a great deal of paperwork that my attorney handled. And I reviewed and Derek signed without complaint. The West End property was returned to Derek's name. Rochelle was required to account for the rental income she had collected during the period of the fraudulent transfer, 18 months of income, from 2 occupied units, which was a number with enough digits that her Sandy Springs attorney stopped returning calls promptly around month 11. Rochelle did not attend Christmas that year. She sent a card in January that said very little and meant less. Derek called her in February. I didn't ask him to. He didn't tell me he was going to. He just did it one evening while I was in my office, and I heard his voice through the wall for 40 minutes in the particular register of someone saying true things carefully. He came into the office afterward and sat in the chair across from my desk and said, "She's not ready to be honest about it yet." "She may not ever be," I said. "I know," he said. "But I needed to try." That was Derek. It was always going to be Derek, the man who called 3 days later, who listened before he spoke, who needed to try even when trying was unlikely to produce the result he wanted. I had married that quality along with everything else, and I did not wish it away, even when it complicated things, because it was the same quality that had made him worth all of it in the first place. Gloria came to Sunday dinner in March. She brought a sweet potato pie she'd made from her mother's recipe, and she set it on our kitchen counter and looked around our Kirkwood house with the measured approval of a woman who notices quality without announcing it. We ate at the table on the back porch because the March evening was mild enough, and the porch faced east and caught the last of the light. We talked about the house, about Derek's current project, a commercial building renovation in the old Fourth Ward, about a trip Gloria was planning to Charleston with her sister. We did not talk about Rochelle. Not because the subject was forbidden, we were past forbidding each other subjects, all three of us, but because it wasn't what the evening needed. What the evening needed was what it was the three of us at a table in early spring, eating sweet potato pie and talking about ordinary things the way people do when they have survived something and come out on the other side still willing to be ordinary together. Before she left, Gloria stood in our front hallway, pulling on her coat, and looked at me in the specific way she had looked at me at the reception directly, with the full weight of what she meant to say behind it. "I want to tell you something," she said. "All right," I said. I spent 30 years managing Rochelle, making space for what she needed, smoothing things over, not asking questions I was afraid of the answers to. She paused, finished with the coat button. I told myself it was love. Some of it was, but some of it was just easier. And easier has a cost that you don't see until someone else pays it. I didn't say anything. Sometimes the right response to a true thing is just to receive it. "You didn't do easier," she said. "And it cost you something to do it the hard way. I want you to know I see that." She hugged me before she left a real one, both arms the kind that lasts long enough to mean something. Then she went down the front steps to her car and drove away into the Atlanta evening. I stood in the doorway for a moment after her taillights disappeared. The neighborhood was quiet. Someone down the street was grilling something. A dog was barking 2 houses over in the specific way of a dog that wants to come inside and knows someone is home. Derek came up behind me and put his hands on my shoulders, both of them the same way Camille had in the bridal suite, the weight of someone who loves you and knows when weight is what you need. "What did she say?" he asked. "That she sees me," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Do you believe her?" I thought about it honestly, the way I tried to think about everything. "Yes," I said. "I do." We stood there together for another minute in the doorway of our Kirkwood house in the mild March evening, with the dog barking and the grill smell and the ordinary world doing its ordinary things all around us. Then Derek said, "Come inside, there's still pie." And I did. And there was. A woman in a white dress tried to make herself the story of my wedding. She almost did. But a story can only be taken from you if you're not fully present in it. And I had been present in mine since the moment I decided that what I knew was more powerful than what she was willing to admit. The work you do quietly in the months before anyone is watching is the work that holds when everything tries to come apart. Preparation isn't paranoia. It isn't coldness. It's the most profound form of self-respect. There is the decision to take your own life seriously enough to protect it before it needs protecting. Not every person who comes to your celebration comes to celebrate you. Some come to confirm a story they've already written about you, one where you are smaller, less certain, more manageable than you actually are. The best thing you can do is simply refuse to be that version of yourself. Not loudly, not for them. Just refuse. Show up fully formed. Do the work. Know what you know. And let the truth arrive in its own time, in its own 11 words, to whoever needs to hear it. What time is it where you are? Whatever time it is, you still have it. Use it.